Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. I'm super excited you're tuning in today because we're going to tackle something absolutely crucial and honestly kind of misunderstood in cloud security. We're talking about architecting resiliency in Microsoft Sentinel. Just imagine that sinking feeling, right? A critical regional outage alert lights up your dashboard. Your SOC is scrambling and you're just sitting there wondering, wait, are my detections even firing right now? Today, we're going to draw a hard line between Microsoft's automatic protections and, more importantly, exactly where your responsibility kicks in. If you manage a security operations center, nailing this difference is literally the key to keeping your organization protected when the unexpected happens.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. First, HA versus DR. Then, the shared responsibility model. Third, active workspace setup. Next, data lake disaster recovery. And finally, regional restrictions. Let's just dive right in. Section 1, HA versus DR, baseline versus redundancy. So to kick things off, we really need to nail down the fundamental difference between high availability and disaster recovery in the cloud. These terms get tossed around a lot, but in Sentinel, they mean two very distinct things for your architecture. The divide is actually pretty stark. High availability, or HA, that happens automatically within a single region. It's built right in. Disaster recovery, or DR, on the other hand, deals with cross-region redundancy. And this requires your active architectural design. You just can't rely on default settings if an entire region drops offline. Now it's actually really cool how Sentinel handles HA natively. Within supported regions, Azure uses physically separate groups of data centers, availability zones. So if one zone experiences a failure, say a massive power outage hits one specific data center, Sentinel just automatically fails over to the remaining zones. Boom, high availability for your apps and data, zero manual intervention from your team. It is a fantastic baseline protection. Section 2, the shared responsibility model. Who does what? But what happens when that baseline just isn't enough? Like, what happens when a catastrophic event takes down an entire Azure region? That brings us to our next concept, and it comes with a bit of a twist. When it comes to disaster recovery, Microsoft operates on a shared responsibility model. They ensure the baseline platform and infrastructure running, sure. But a lot of Azure services don't just magically replicate your data or fall back to another region for you. Basically, assuming Microsoft is handling your cross-region DR automatically, yeah, that's a really dangerous assumption. Architecting that redundancy is entirely on your shoulders. Now, before we actually build out that architecture, let's clear up some legacy SIEM baggage. Microsoft Sentinel does not use search heads or ingestion clusters. If you're coming from the traditional on-prem SIEM world, you're probably hunting for those exact components to build your redundancy. But Sentinel is cloud native, and under the hood, it processes data totally differently. So, instead of those legacy pieces, Sentinel relies on the Azure Monitor Pipeline to manage ingestion and the KQL engine, Kusto Query Language, to handle searches against the log analytics data plane. Because these specific cloud mechanics are driving Sentinel, achieving true redundancy means we have to adopt one very specific strategy, and that is the active workspace setup. Section 3. Active workspace setup. Cross-region resilience. Okay, let's really dive into this. This is the ultimate, mirrored solution for cross-region disaster recovery. It's exactly how you guarantee continuous operations when an entire region goes dark. Here's the high-level roadmap. 4 steps to achieve a rock-solid active environment. 1. Identical workspaces. 2. Redundant ingestion. 3. Sync configurations. And 4. Continuous monitoring. Let's quickly break these down. Step 1 sets our foundation. You've got to deploy 2 identical log analytics workspaces, both enabled for Microsoft Sentinel. And here is the kicker. They must be in 2 different geographically separated paired regions. I really can't stress paired regions enough here. If your primary is in US East, your secondary needs to be in its paired region, like US West. That way, a localized disaster won't just wipe out both environments at once. Next up, redundant data ingestion. You've got to configure your business-critical data sources to fire their logs into both workspaces at the exact same time. Think about it. If your primary region suddenly drops, there's zero panic. All those critical logs are already sitting pretty in the secondary region, fully searchable and ready for your analysts to jump in. But here is the real catch, right here in step 3. Having the data in 2 places just isn't enough. Your detection logic has to live in both places too. You have to manually define and consistently maintain your analytic rules, automation rules, and all those other critical configurations across both workspaces. If you tweak a detection rule in your primary, you better update it in your secondary. It definitely takes some manual upkeep to ensure your security posture doesn't take a hit during a failover. Which leads us to the huge payoff in step 4. Because this is a true active-active setup, there's no massive switch to flip, no frantic data restoration during a crisis. If one region suffers an outage, the other is completely unaffected. Your SOC team keeps monitoring, keeps investigating threats without literally a single second of downtime. It is a total game changer. Section 4. Data Lake Disaster Recovery. Protecting data lake. Okay, moving on. Sentinel recently rolled out a really powerful modern data lake for cost-effective long-term storage. But disaster recovery for the data lake works a bit differently than that active-active setup we just built. This one actually requires direct coordination with Microsoft. The business continuity and disaster recovery, or BCDR process for the data lake breaks down into 3 specific phases: preparation, enablement, and failover. Preparation is pretty straightforward. You must already have that active-active workspace baseline we just talked about fully up and running. You simply can't protect the data lake if you don't already have those identical workspaces humming along in your primary and secondary regions. Once that baseline is locked in, you move to enablement. Now, unlike the standard workspace setup, this is not just some self-service toggle in the Azure portal. You actively have to reach out to Microsoft customer support. You hand over your secondary region and workspace ID, and their team does the heavy lifting behind the scenes to onboard that secondary workspace for data lake disaster recovery. And finally, the failover. If disaster actually strikes and a regional outage happens, the failover process for the data lake is entirely manual. You have to open a support ticket with Microsoft to initiate the failover to your designated secondary region. So, just to be super clear, while your active-active workspaces keep your real-time alerting alive instantly, getting access to your historical data lake, that requires human intervention and support time to failover. Section 5. Regional rules and restrictions, geographical limits. Let's see how this all builds into the real world. We need to look at the practical limitations of where you can actually deploy this architecture globally, because there are a few specific regional rules you absolutely need to know about. The customer-enabled BCDR approach we've been walking through today is widely supported, but there are some major exceptions. Currently, this setup is not supported for customers in the European Union, in Israel, or within Azure environments operated by 21 VNet in China. Just to give a bit of context for the global enterprise architects out there, the European Union restriction is specifically tied to EU data boundary compliance. Navigating data sovereignty laws means there are super strict controls on replicating data across borders, and right now, that prevents this specific customer-enabled DR model from being used in that jurisdiction. Wow, we have covered a lot of ground today, right? Going all the way from automatic availability zones to the manual, precision architecture you need for an active-active cross-region deployment. So I want to leave you with one final provocative question. Would your current Microsoft Sentinel architecture survive a full regional outage today? If your answer isn't a rock-solid, confident yes, then it is definitely time to review your DR strategy using the blueprint we just laid out. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and seriously, go check those workspace configurations right now.